Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we visit the Mesabi Iron Range's last standing headframe and learn about the efforts to preserve it. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Joining me today to talk about this piece of Iron Range history is arts and entertainment reporter Jay Gabler. Jay, welcome back to the podcast.
So glad to be here.
All right, Jay. So tell me about how you found this story. This one's a little kind of a backwards way of finding it, because as I understand it, we were looking at another story, which we'll get into a little bit later. But then while looking into this other story, you found the one we're talking about today.
Yep, we have another story forthcoming in about a month about the Iron Man in Chisholm, Minnesota. And you'll learn much more about that when the time comes. But I reached out to Bridget Maruska, who runs the Parks and Recreation Department for the city of Chisholm. And while we were corresponding about possible people to talk to, about the Iron Man statue, she pointed out, if you're interested in unique features, on the Iron Range and in Chisholm specifically, you should look at the Bruce Mine Headframe. We're turning into a park. And I'm like, a mine being turned into a park? Yeah, that sounds like that could be a Northlandia story. And sure enough, it was. We saw both the Iron Man and this headframe on the same day.
Made a nice day trip up to the Iron Range. So what exactly is this headframe and the park surrounding it? And while we're at it, what on earth is a headframe?
I guess I knew what a headframe was, but I could not have put that name to it before reporting this story. I am learning a lot about mining, writing for the Duluth News Tribune, and one of the things I'm learning is that a headframe is the term for the structure, sort of the superstructure in an underground mine that stands above the ground and supports all the machinery that you need to run an underground mine. One of the people we talked with at the Bruce Mine Headframe Park is a man named Roger Johnson, an extremely experienced mining expert, used to work for the state of Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and he explained a little bit more about this headframe specifically, which towers dozens and dozens of feet above the ground.
The base of the head frame, you can see a concrete pad there. Everything had to go down through that and come out of it. So the tree, the equipment and the ore and the rock and the people, everything went up and down through that. The cables were up on top. The shivs are down below there. They would be up there and there'd be a cable and that would go down, lift the skip and the cage. And then they went back here to the hoist house where they controlled it, steam hose, for raising and lowering. This mine is not a deep mine. This is like by 300 feet. Comparing the Sedan underground, which is the 27th level, which is 2,700 feet, but it's at a decline, so it's 2,400 feet vertically. It's a lot deeper ore bodies than what is here. But it's a significant operation.
So Jay, while we were there, we talked to Roger and two other members of the Chisholm Beautification Association. Who else did we talk to there?
We talked to Dave Pasenda and Edwin Waters, and all three of these guys have been working for a long time to beautify Chisholm, so there you go, but specifically to turn this headframe into the centerpiece of a new park that's right on the Mesabi Trail, so it's accessible to people who are visiting Chisholm by car and also by bike or by foot.
We actually saw a couple bikers bike and visit the park while we were there. That was kind of a nice little surprise to find there.
Yeah, we saw this headframe do its work because these two bikers who turned out to be from Boston were exploring the Mesabi Trail, and they saw this huge piece of machinery towering above the trail. And, they would have seen it anywhere between now and decades ago. It was built way back in the 20s. They would have seen it standing there. But before this park was there, they wouldn't have had any way to learn more about the headframe or see it, more closely or learn more about the history of mining in the range. But we actually saw them pull off, and, we happened to be standing there with three experts on the subject, so they were able to get a lot of their questions answered. But in the future, they're going to be sort of informative plaques spaced all around the headframe and the foundations of other buildings that were part of the mine complex. And so people who are using the trail will not only have this headframe as a landmark, but will also give them an opportunity to learn more about the history of mining in Chisholm and on the Mesabi Iron Range.
That's got to be a fun discovery for them. The first discovery is, this giant headframe that they probably weren't familiar with possibly. And then they happen to run into three experts of the subject that give them the full background about it. So they find this big head frame right along the trail, and then the expert to learn all about it.
Yeah, and they actually apologized for interrupting our interview because we were talking to these guys and they came up and started asking their own questions. The biking tourists did, but it was all good. We all were curious about the history of this area.
Yeah, I kind of wish I was with you guys at that point, because I was like getting my B-roll. I just happened to get video of them biking by, and I saw them walk to you guys. That would have been kind of cool to kind of get interrupted that way. I know they apologize for it, but I think that's kind of one of those situations where like it's kind of cool to get interrupted, by, like you said, the head frame the park doing its job. And so why is this head frame still standing when literally every other head frame on the Mesabi Iron Range is gone?
That is a great question, and none of the people we talked to really had a precise answer for that. There used to be many more head frames, many more underground mines on the Mesabi Iron Range. Ultimately, they gave way to open pit mines, which are more cost effective. But there used to be more underground mines, and Roger Johnson was able to give us a little bit of history regarding what happened when the mine became no longer cost effective to operate, which is essentially just before World War II, and when the company went under.
They took down all the buildings. Actually, the drying plant, they shipped back to Chicago. And then they took down all the structures, and even the houses. There were like 14 homes. They're actually under the highway. I mean, that's where the spot was, which was the Bruce location. Most of these places had locations, and the miners worked right there, and they walked right to the mine, So this one, even though it didn't operate after 38, there was some stockpile shipments back in the 50s. But actually. And then they went bankrupt, the company left.
So basically, by World War II, the mine is no longer operational. The company has pulled up and left. A lot of the buildings, the machinery are gone, and you're just left with the head frame. Why? No one ever got around to pulling down that head frame. Well, it costs time, money. People had other things to worry about. The world is at war, and increasingly, the head frame becomes historic as the other head frames and other mining equipment in the range disappears. And finally, by the 1970s, there was talk about, okay, this is, not being maintained. It's dated. It's potentially dangerous. Maybe we should think about taking it down. And in comes a woman named Veda Panakvar. And this is a name that you're going to hear again when we talk about the Iron Man, because she was pivotal in the drive to build this giant Iron Man statue that we'll be talking about a month from now. So she's a writer at the local newspaper, and when there's talk of tearing this head frame down, she puts pen to paper and puts ink to press and articulates a vision for preserving this head frame. She wrote in 1978, "The Bruce head frame, like the great open pits, is symbolic of those men who worked and too often died in the red earth of the Mesabi. And for that one reason, if not for any of the many others, it should be saved." And she explained a little bit more about the history of the mine, although it was not one of the bigger or deeper underground mines on the Iron Range. There was a fatality. At least one man died in 1927 when a room collapsed in the mine, so a miner passed in the course of his duty. That same year, actually, there was another cave-in, and a miner named Nick Bosanich was trapped underground for 46 hours while his colleagues worked to dig him out. And he was, in fact, rescued. He was successfully dug out after 46 hours trapped in that cave-in, and apparently the first thing that he asked for when he got out of the mine, he wanted a cigarette.
Oh, I was going to say water or anything.
Nope, give him a smoke. This is 1927. So anyway, so Veda Panakvar did a lot to sort of to articulate the reasons that the community might want to preserve this head frame. And it was successful. In 1978, the head frame was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Okay, so then it's preserved. It's not going anywhere, but nor is anything else happening.
Mm-hmm. So now you talked about how it was saved. But what was the impetus to actually create it into a park, to actually do something with it beyond it just kind of being there?
So Dave Pasenda, another member of the Chisholm Beautification Association, filled in this piece of the story for us.
This park was started 10 years ago. There was 4 of us that would go and visit other cities and parks and recreation areas and then have lunch. And we were on our way home, driving by here, and the 2 Eds, Ed Waters, who you'll meet later, and Ed Simons, who's deceased, and Ricky Ellison. And One of the eds said we should do something about this place. It's a National Historic Site, because what you see now isn't what was here. It was all woods. There was just a little trail coming in here. And so we started. And we all belong to the Chisholm Beautification Association, and we brought it to the board.
So the time that we were there, Jay, the park is not entirely complete yet. More specifically, there's some signage that currently lie empty. What kind of information will those signs have, and what kind of other amenities will the park provide?
Yep. So according to Bridget Maruska, they are hoping to have the park basically complete by the time winter weather hits in the Northland this year. So they'll get those signs completed. They'll get some lighting up. They'll add a porta potty, a satellite restroom, some bike racks. So nothing super complicated or fancy, but just some nice amenities for people who are using the park as a trailhead, which it is, a way to get onto and off of the Mesabi Trail. And basically, the guys we talked to, the members of the Chisholm Beautification Association, were happy that it's being preserved. So part of this preservation effort is that they did have it looked at by a structural engineer, and some material was added to make sure that it stays upright. And I mentioned a potential safety issue before. I want to assure people that is no longer the case. It's been reinforced, so it's going to remain standing for the foreseeable future, so people can visit the park. And just the fact that they can see and clearly access this head frame feels like a win to Edwin Waters, another member of the committee.
Imagine, I drive by every day, and now I like it because the road is open, the brush is cut here, and you can see it in here, and there's a lot of people coming in here, bike people, and it's on a trail. And
just to clear up any possible confusion that could come from listening to this, while it is true that this is the last head frame on the Mesabi Iron Range, but those who are familiar with the region are aware of the currently working head frame that is in Tower.
Yeah, that's right. As Roger Johnson mentioned when talking about the size of the Bruce Mine Headframe, it's not as big as that Tower Sudan mine. And obviously the Bruce Mine is very much closed, capped off, no way to access it anymore. Whereas the Tower Sudan mine is now a state park where it allows people to actually go down very deep in the mine and access that mine. The difference is that the Tower Sudan mine is on the Vermilion Iron Range, an older iron range to the northeast of the Mesabi Iron Range. So colloquially, people just say the range or the Iron Range, and we sort of know what they mean, this area of Minnesota where iron has been and still is mined. But technically speaking, there are multiple ranges of iron, that is areas where iron is found in this area of Minnesota. So there's the Vermilion Iron Range, there's the Mesabi Iron Range, there's some other areas where iron are found. So there's the distinction. Roger Johnson spoke a little bit to the differences among the iron ranges.
There are three ranges. Vermilion is the earliest and the oldest, and had started open pit and went to underground. Very high grade out of the Sudan mine. There are also two mines in Ely, Pioneer and Sibley, I think. And none of them are operating except Sudan is a park now, state park. So you can go in. It's very good because you can go right down, take the little train, and see the last workings that the men worked in at that time. So that was good. The Mesabi is the largest and the only operating mine in Minnesota. And that extends from Ely on the east to Grand Rapids on the west.
You might be forgiven if you get them mixed up a little bit. I feel like most people kind of, again, just say the range. In fact, and oftentimes people who aren't from the area at all have mistakenly thrown Duluth into the range as well, even though we're definitely not part of the range. It's definitely not part of these different, the Mesabi and the Vermilion Range.
Yeah. So, that's if you want to get technical about it. But the bottom line is that these standing head frames are now very rare. Underground mining is no longer happening in Minnesota. There was a time when it was profitable and it was the way to go. But, fairly early on, way back before World War II, there was a real transition towards open pit mines, which are more affordable, larger scale. You can get more iron out of them. So that's pretty much the mining that has been happening for the last decades in Minnesota. So preserving these head frames is a way to preserve time in Minnesota history when, people would go down into the extremely dark mines and take the ore out to, make money and build our country.
Mm-hmm. So Jay, given all the investment around preserving this head frame and then building it into a park, what would you say is the historical value?
Yeah, they're spending over $1 million to complete this park. And basically, the members of the Chisholm Beautification Association all have, in varying ways, histories in the mining industry. And for them, this is a way of not only preserving a piece of material history of the Iron Range so that people can see how mines used to operate back when there were underground mines on the Mesabi Iron Range, but it provides a way for people to remember and think about the many, many, many generations of families who, many of them immigrant families, came to Minnesota to work in the mines in search of a better life for themselves and their families. Here's what Roger Johnson had to say.
And my parents were both immigrants, Swedish immigrants. My dad was a carpenter and a painter, worked in the underground and in the open pit. And so I'm heritage of that, and I'm thankful for it. And we're glad to have this reproduced because it represents what took place before. We don't have any underground mines working anymore in Minnesota. We did have early years, but it's a lot cheaper to go open pit, bigger equipment, all the rest.
David Pacenda also spoke to this topic.
Mining is why our forefathers came. My grandparents came, from the old country, basically for a job. They were immigrants. Our mission statement emphasizes the immigrants. You know what I mean? They were trying to better themselves, to have a better life. And if you look at what they did and what they wanted was like education for their children. That's why the range and that had such good schools. But mining is part of the history. My sons work in mining, my grandsons work in mining, and it's a way of life, a good way of life. And this is just a little bit of history to remember all those people, the immigrants or the people that started this stuff. But yeah, we feel quite proud of what we've accomplished.
So Jay, it seems pretty obvious the historical significance of the headframe. Obviously, the Mesabi Iron Range and the surrounding ranges, mining is integral to the history and how it's progressed to where it is today because of all of that. But why do you think it fits in the realm of Northlandia, along with this park?
Yeah, totally. The way I put it in the article is that in most cities, if you have a beautification committee, you'd expect that the last thing they would want to do is preserve some old rusty piece of machinery that hasn't been used in decades. They'd want to get that out of there and put in flowers or whatever, put in a park. Well, not in Chisholm. They put in flowers, native perennials, no less. They put in a park, but they put it around this headframe. I think it speaks to not only how much this region cares about history, but the way that specifically in the Iron Range and in the Northland, you have history coexisting with the present and the future. This headframe is done. It will never be used again. This mine is a thing of the past, but the headframe remains. It's a tie to the past that is now used as part of a park that's about the future. That's about, our generation and younger generations using this space, using the trail, enjoying the natural beauty of the region. And while they're remembering the history of this region. I think that's something that the Northland does very well and very often, is linking history in a real living way to the present and the future. And that's what the Bruce Mine Headframe Park is all about.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that speaks true to even just since we launched this podcast of, the Northern Rail train car and utilizing old train boxcars, repurposing those old historic buildings and turning into a museum. I think that speaks true to a lot of the Northland in general about this mixing of modern and historic into a new way of using it.
Yeah, it's not either or. I think, if you can preserve that history, it enhances. I mean, in this case, you could just have a park there, right? You could have a trailhead. It would still be very nice. It's a beautiful region, great trail, that would be fine. But the fact that you have this towering headframe as part of this park, just makes it extra cool and helps remind people of the history of the region.
All right, Jay, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you again so much for joining us. Excited to have you back again soon to talk about the Chisholm Iron Man. So going back up to Chisholm once again. So stay tuned for that episode.
Yeah, just as they were preserving the headframe, they decided to build one more new, at the time, towering structure in Chisholm, Minnesota.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos and video produced by myself, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe could have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnewstribune.news. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss around the right place at the right time. Ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.